Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion on cultural challenges and biases. We are super excited that you decided to join us today. We kindly request your attention for a brief moment in the spirit of transparency and utmost respect for our community. We have some information we'd like you to read on this disclaimer screen. By taking a few moments to read through the disclaimer, you empower yourself with important information regarding the boundaries of our knowledge sharing environment. Please take just a moment to read through this screen also, and then together we're going to embark upon some exciting topics in early childhood education. All right, so for this panel, these experts, it was created to provide real-world examples of two very important topics. The two topics we will discuss today are cultural challenges and biases that ELL students and teachers face, and the unique phases of cultural adjustment that ELL students encounter in the classroom. So, Jessica, I would like to start with you. Will you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Jessica Perez Maqueda. I am the biliteracy coach at a public charter elementary school that is located in Sarasota in the state of Florida called Dreamers Academy. And in our program, we provide a two-way immersion instruction where our students learn in two languages of instruction, that's Spanish and English. And the way this is done is that our students acquire the knowledge and the skills of all the standards for all the grade levels equally in both languages of instruction. The reason why programs like this one that we have at Dreamers Academy is becoming very popular is because it's being demonstrated based on the data collected is that is the fastest model to close that linguistic gap. And it was initially designed to support ELs, but it's becoming more and more popular with the English-speaking population and people coming from other countries. We actually in our school have students that come from Russia and students that come from Brazil and Ukraine. So it's offering students the opportunity to learn content through language. I've also been an educator in Spain, which is my home country, since year 98. There, I worked for a traditional Spanish private school, but we had a tremendous amount of students that were international. So our job as educators was to support these students that were not proficient in Spanish by accommodating our instruction in the classroom. I've also been an ESOL paraprofessional for the District of Manatee County, which is very close to Sarasota, also in Florida, where I was part of that support team that helped with the identification of ELs in our schools and to kind of coordinate with the teachers to put in place their EL plan, which shows, how proficient each student is in those four language domains, which is the listening, the speaking, the reading, and the writing, and which kind of activities they could do in the classroom to accommodate these kids. I'm also been a dual language teacher for the past 3 years, and it's an amazing program for anybody who wants to be immersed in a very multicultural environment and be highly academic successful, and obviously to develop bilingualism and biliteracy in the school classroom, in the school setting.
Frank?
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Frank Guevara. I am currently associate faculty member here at University of Arizona Global Campus, and I've been working in the field of early childhood education for a couple of decades now. Interestingly, I started my own education in my district's pilot bilingual education kindergarten class. And so it's wonderful to be able to have learned as a DLL student early on and to have experienced much of what Jessica was describing. I remember we had instruction 3 days a week in English and then 2 days a week in Spanish. And it was just amazing to see my Spanish-speaking counterparts light up on the days where instruction was in their home language because they could demonstrate their proficiency. I've also served as a program director for programs in California, Texas, North Carolina, Colorado, with Department of Defense, and then was privileged to serve as the program director for a dual immersion English-Spanish inclusive preschool program in Colorado as well. So again, much of what Jessica was describing about the two-way dual immersion it is fantastic and magnificent to see it in action and to see how both ELLs and then students for whom English is their first language can gain proficiency in a second language. And then I recently left UAGC from a full-time position to take on a new endeavor. So I've kind of come full circle now, starting as a kindergarten student in bilingual education. And now I get to support early educators who are Spanish speaking to continue their education by providing bilingual instruction in child development and early childhood education here in California. So I'm very pleased and welcome to be able to share my expertise with you today. Thank you.
I love the expertise we have in this panel. So let me ask you first, what cultural challenges or biases do ELL students and educators face? Jessica, would you start?
Sure. There's data, and I wanted to bring up here a theorist called Foucault, who says that language is not neutral, and at times we use language as a way to dominate other cultures that we consider minorities, right? So we're putting a little bit of pressure, and this kind of shows in the way our standardized assessments, right, in the different states, we prioritize English, and we're not taking into consideration neither the background knowledge of our students or even their academic background knowledge that they have in their home language. That's not being able to be shared or demonstrated in a traditional school. So somehow that dominant language, which is English in general in the United States, it's a way it's kind of like at times dominating and sometimes repressing minority languages. In traditional monolingual programs, unfortunately, this concern for having our ELs and all students, but including our ELs, to perform during those standards is that there's no room to bring any culture. There's no room to accommodate and, to provide resources for students in their home language or their heritage language. So that kind of like makes it more difficult for our kids. On the other hand, we do also have people who are strong advocates for these students, and they're very aware the importance of bringing culture into the classroom, in whether it's daily activities, classroom discourses, assessments, so they really modify, and they even consider how can we bring these families into our learning community to be part of their learning experiences for the kids and kind of enrich the curriculum. In the dual language instructional programs, culture is something that has, it's one of the pillars of dual language, which is, helping our students to be global citizens and to demonstrate tolerance for the multiple cultures in the globe. But also we feel the pressure of, what we call the norm reference assessments. And that sometimes can deviate the teachers to say, if I need to teach something, yes, they teach in the dual language, the 50-50 model. We teach one day in English, one day in Spanish, and students are expected to do that cross-linguistic transfer of knowledge and skills from one language to the other. But as we get close to testing period, everybody's kind of like focused on the English part. So in a way, we're not allowing our ELs to be able to demonstrate what they have gained during that exposure to the dual language program. So the thing that our educators, for example, I can speak on behalf of my teachers at Dreamers Academy. For example, I met with the team of teachers for specials, the music teacher, the art teacher, my two PE teachers, and my science lab teacher. And they were immediately so willing to say, how can we integrate not only the language of instruction, so it's provided and offered to students with equity, right? It has to be the 50-50. So there's not a minority language in our school. It's really equal. But also how the music teacher incorporates, Italian terms when she is, talking about the musical notes, and Italian musicians or world-known musicians, and how our art teacher talks about different techniques that famous painters have used. And she talks about Pablo Picasso, and she talks about Dali or Van Gogh. around, to expose the kids to that multicultural um, pocket of information. Or PE teachers, they're talking about Rafael Nadal as one of the athletes, or talk about. So it's actually very possible, and it doesn't have to be a dual language program, to bring culture into the classroom and give a chance to those students to feel identified with some of those individuals, or well-known people around the world, because they have some common traits to share with.
Love that. Frank?
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Jessica was describing. There's some wonderful research out of University of Arizona about leveraging students' funds of knowledge. Again, this is their background information, their background knowledge, their rituals, vocabulary, all of that rich cultural history, and to use that from a teaching perspective to integrate into the curriculum. But getting back to the question about some of the challenges, one of the aspects that I've really identified with and I've noticed and experienced growing up is often there's an implicit bias against ELL students and or teachers. And from a personal experience, I can remember when we look at a person's speech register, so kind of the words that they use, as well as their accent, sometimes we make valuations based on what we hear relative to standard written or spoken English. So both of my parents are from Mexico, and growing up, obviously they weren't native English speakers. And so the words that they used and how they spoke and how they sounded was different than what myself and my siblings grew up speaking in the United States. And I'm kind of ashamed to remember that my siblings and I would kind of make fun of my mom sometimes. And we'd say, "Mom, say the word Hollywood." And she'd try to say it, and it would come out Holly good, with a G sound instead of a W sound. And we would crack up laughing because, to us, it sounded funny. And another common mistake you'll hear from Spanish speakers is putting like an sound in front of the hard S. So you'll hear like stop or my stomach, because that's the natural sound pattern in Spanish. And oftentimes when native English speakers hear that dialect or that pronunciation from ELLs or students, we often assign that prejudicial valuation to them as being lower in intelligence or not quite as quick. And sometimes we brush off those students as being dumb or having nothing of value to contribute to the classroom community. I even remember when I was working in the field, we had a student whose parents were from China, and the mom would come in and we'd converse with her, and she had very broken English. And at first, I made that bias, an implicit bias of she's not all that smart. And so I would kind of try to speak very simply to her. And then to my kind of shock, and then again to my being ashamed of that reaction, I came to find out that in China, she was a vice president in Microsoft. And so she was a highly intelligent individual. And I had made this assumption based on her English proficiency of what she could understand. Uh, so I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Students oftentimes will kind of fade into the background because others make assumptions about their ability to contribute, their capacity to understand and participate. And so sometimes feeling that rejection, they'll kind of shut down, and unfortunately can kind of create the self-fulfilling prophecy where they don't participate. And so we continue thinking, well, they don't have anything of value to share with us. The last little piece just wanted to share in terms of teachers and some of the challenges that they face. So right out of college, I was back in my home district, and I was teaching 7th and 8th grade science. And although the majority of the students there were of Hispanic backgrounds and I could communicate with them with my Spanish proficiency, We also had a number of students who were Vietnamese, who spoke Vietnamese or Cantonese or Thai, Tagalog. And so for those students, there was a huge gap. I couldn't translate for them. We were fortunate that the textbook company that we had used had translated some of the workbooks into some of those Asian languages. And so I deliver my instruction, and the students would be looking and looking and trying to understand. And then they'd come up to me afterwards and say, "Can I see what the workbook says?" And I'd hand them the workbook, and it would be like, "That's all I can do for you because I don't have any additional skills." And again, remember, this was before the internet, before AI and all of those types of things. So we didn't have Google Translate to be able to support. Um, but those are some of the challenges that could still exist for some of our early educators, is that language gap and not having the resources or support to be able to meet students where they are and support them linguistically in terms of content mastery and skill development.
Thank you both for sharing those real world examples. That's what this is for, so we appreciate that so much. So the second question is, what are the unique phases of cultural adjustment, and what signs should an educator watch for in students? Jessica, would you
Would you
like
like to
to
go?
go
Okay.
first, Jessica?
All right. Well, thank you. I know that, Frank and I were both addressing culture, and we're both obviously language is a big part because it manifests, right? That our accent and how much we know and how proficient we can be, but culture also is behavior and how our students, with their interpersonal relationships with students who are from a different culture, how they come together to do collaborative work. We have some social groups that are very collective. They actually like to lean on each other or take roles. Is a very communal approach to solve the task, or to address the issue, where in other cultures like the one that we have in the United States, it's more individualistic, right? So we're looking for us to meet our own goals and for us to follow our own path, and in a way we do not require the effort of other people or the support of other people. And also, one thing that I do observe, that it's also the gender role expectations, and this is something that is very noticeable in the Hispanic community, where in general our girls tend to be they feel very in charge of taking care of issues and telling everybody what to do, and sometimes that might cause a little bit of a friction with students who don't share the same culture. But in terms of adjusting, I will say assimilation is something that perhaps we do not want to see in our schools, in our classrooms, because that means really that the dominant culture gets swollen by, I'm sorry, the minority culture gets swollen by the dominant culture, right? So I do not want to have ELs feeling like they have to give up their identity in order to feel like they fit in the new setting. So what we would like to see, it's maybe more a pluralistic or bicultural approach where both cultures can actually coexist. So I do not have to give up my Spanish. I do not have to give up my traditions or, my habits just because I live in a different culture where the dominant language is different and the traditions are different. So I will finding a good balance to go from, that the assimilation towards the bilateral environment. That's probably what I would like to see for the kids, the ELs.
Great points. I wanted to take a little step back, if you don't mind, as we think about some of those stages that children might go through. I've had the privilege of living in 6 different US states, and so I have a little taste of what that can feel like, especially most recently we were living in Hawaii, which if you've ever visited and really seen the native aspects, not the touristy parts, really immerse yourself into the culture, it is completely different than at least what I've experienced in the United States so far. And as we look at the research on cultural adjustment, depending on who you look at, there could be four or more phases that an individual will go through. Oftentimes we start with kind of that honeymoon phase. And I remember going to Hawaii, is like, oh my God, everything here is amazing. We don't have mangoes like this in California. We don't have anything like this, back on the mainland. And it's that excitement and euphoria of kind of the grass is greener on the other side. Uh, Oftentimes, after that honeymoon phase, students might experience kind of a feeling of negotiation or hostility, where all the new stuff sometimes can be stressful. You have to learn, okay, how do I do this in this culture? What does this term mean in this culture? What are the rituals and routines in this new culture? Because they're different from where I came from. And so you have this overload of information, and sometimes you just get frustrated or disoriented or just tired of why isn't it like it was before? Um, and so teachers might be on the lookout of, okay, that euphoria initially, and then maybe a little bit of downturn because they get frustrated. Um, and sometimes what used to be seen as the shiny new apple is now, well, back home, this was better. Back home, we did it more efficiently. Back home, whatever it could be. So that the shininess is now gone, and we start thinking back to, okay, what it was like back home in the homeland, and sometimes those feelings of, well, it was better back there. You guys don't know what you're doing here. Um, Another phase that students might go to is that now we're starting to adjust or make some integration into the new culture, recognizing I'm not going anywhere. I'm here in this new culture. And in order to survive and be successful, I kind of have to start integrating my past with this new culture. And so we start from a student's perspective, we might start to see students um, beginning to understand those classroom expectations and those cultural cues. In the United States, bells ring, people line up, walking down the hallways, there are expectations for what that's supposed to be like. And so, whereas initially there was a lot of that stress and tension because I'm trying to figure it all out, now that I've spent some time in this new culture, I'm getting to be in the same groove as everybody else. And so it's less taxing, and I can start feeling a little bit more comfortable. And then I think, speaking to what Jessica was talking about, ultimately we'd have that bicultural experience. Um, Depending on where one lives, that could be more or less realized. But ultimately, an individual will come to kind of a mastery or an acceptance of the new culture. So now we really understand, okay, these are the rules, these are the expectations of this new culture. Um, and in order for me to be successful, these are some of the things that I'll have to do. And likewise, now there's kind of a mindset shift of wanting to fully participate in the new culture. Speaking from experience, I remember, my family, again, was born and raised in Mexico. I'm second generation, so born here. But growing up, all the traditions and holidays that we had were based on the old country, based on, what we did in Mexico. And so initially, my family held really tight to some of those traditions, but slowly we started to integrate some of the American traditions, the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, eating turkey, um, things which you don't do in Mexico. Um, and, I had a very different experience than my parents because I was born and raised in this country. So to me, the dominant culture of American society was more of my culture than the old ways of my parents. Um, but over time, my parents acclimated and adjusted and have adopted the American culture as well. And so I'm blessed, I feel, to be able to celebrate both the heritage and the customs and the rituals and traditions from my parents' country of origin, as well as the beautiful things and traditions that we have here in the United States. And so for me, it's kind of that feeling of authenticity now, being able to navigate, some of the old as well as some of the new. And so for educators, I think it's really important to kind of keep an eye on that emotional expression of the acculturation and integration process, from that euphoria initially to maybe that disheartedness and feelings of frustration, and then hopefully eventually reaching that stage of being able to feel like you are a part of the dominant culture. In my opinion, hopefully not giving up your home culture, but that blend between the old and the new, and being able to see that it's not that the grass is greener on both sides, on the other side, but that the grass is green on both sides of the fence. And there's wonderful things of each culture to celebrate, and to contribute to what we call, this human experience.
I have to say, Frank, I really appreciate that you explained the stages because at times we have misconceptions of these students that are just trying to get through the day, right? They go through the silent period and they're not interacting. So it's like that, we immediately may say, oh, they don't know anything. They're just lazy. They don't want to participate. Their families are not interested. They don't want to help. All these misconceptions that are so intrinsically, related to just these families going through those stages that Frank just explained. So for teachers to be aware that this is a process that takes time, and it takes a lot besides the training for the educator, is the patience and the compassion, that they're just trying to adjust to a really very different, like Frank was explaining, you go from euphoria, wow, look at the classrooms they're so cool, they're so decorated, we have so many things, like where in my home country is just, four walls, there's nothing there to decorate the classroom. So I really would like to encourage future educators to pay attention to what Frank was mentioning, that it is a process that takes time. Language barrier, it's a process that takes time. So invest in, effort and patience and caring for your students is going to pay off. And our job it really is to serve this community, right? So understanding their needs, it's part of our contribution to help them through that process of acculturation or adjusting to the new culture.
Wow. The grass is green on both sides. That's amazing because as teachers we have to remember that. And you all gave some fantastic ideas for everyone that's listening to this panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you.